Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar, 2025 Winds and Trends in State Climate Policy. My name is Jeremy Tarr. I'm the Director of the State Policy Program here at Clean Air Task Force. Clean Air Task Force is a global nonprofit organization working to catalyze the rapid development and deployment of clean energy. We bring more than 25 years of policy expertise and operate as a pragmatic advocacy group with a presence across the United States and internationally. Our state advocacy leverages the deep technical and policy expertise that CATF is known for, and we provide timely fact-based education, analysis, and insights to advance climate and clean energy solutions in states across the country. We work with stakeholders, including state legislators, governor's offices, executive agencies, businesses, communities, and others to help states achieve their economic, environmental, and public health goals through climate action. This year, we started our webinar series. This is the 6th webinar in the series. Our first webinars covered clean electricity standards, meeting load growth with clean firm power, low carbon fuel standards, and our low emission industry policy playbook, and one on fusion energy earlier this fall. Before we jump into the content, just a few housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website. We'll email all of you a link to the video and slides in the next day or so. And then we really welcome your questions. If you have them, please chat them in the Q&A. We'll have time at the end for questions and answers. So anytime throughout the webinar, please go ahead and chat your question. When it comes to climate and energy policy, most of the attention this year has gone to federal efforts. But with this webinar, we have a few goals. We want to convey the importance of state action. We want to share examples of states taking meaningful, positive steps for emission reductions and technology deployment. We also are going to identify trends at play nationally, regionally, and in particular states when it comes to climate and energy policy. And finally, we're going to identify some of the opportunities that we see for 2026. So, today's presentation is not comprehensive of all winds and trends across all states. It's really tailored to the topics and the states where our CATF, where we're most active. But we welcome your insights in the chat or after the webinar on, you're going to have your own thoughts on winds and trends, and we'd love to add them to our list. So again, thanks for being here today, and please put your questions in the Q&A. Next slide, please. So here's a bit about our agenda. I'm just going to start with a couple minutes on background of CATF, and then we'll go through winds and trends kind of by region, and then we'll have 15 minutes or so for Q&A. CATF was founded in 1996. We're a global organization with offices in Boston, Washington, Brussels, and staff working virtually all across the world. Our mission is to push the technology and policy changes that are needed to achieve a zero-emission, high-energy planet at an affordable cost. Next. Our team, our state policy team, is the folks that you're going to get to know today. We've broken the country into 6 different regions, and we focus on 1, 2, 3 states per region with a total of about 13 states. And the states that have the white dots are the ones that we're primarily focused in. Next. So I want to start with a few thoughts kind of on state climate policy across the country. First of all, state climate action is critical. First, states make decisions every day that affect emissions near term and long term. They're making decisions through policy, through permitting, regulations, grant programs, implementing federal rules, on and on. So it's really important to be engaged at the state level. States deploy innovative technologies and scale-proven technologies, and this is critical for solving the global problem of climate change. States are taking steps to enable, to push, to pull deployment of renewables, of nuclear, geothermal, fusion, transmission, industrial carbon capture, on and on and on. Third, states are really important hubs for policy innovations. And these policy innovations, say in a particular state, domino into other states. States learn from each other. They also scale federally. So the federal government is most comfortable enacting federally, spreading policies nationally that have worked in one or more states already. State action is also really important to continue climate progress during periods of challenging federal leadership. And states are and have been critical partners during times of significant, positive federal action. We also see that there's a real opportunity at this moment for states, subnationals, to work across borders with jurisdictions in other parts of the world and to have collaboration. It's important to have this collaboration, on policy, on technology deployment, trade, and to really continue to be a positive voice for U.S. climate action internationally. Next. As I think about state policy these days, there are a number of big factors that are at play, and I imagine each of you may have additional factors that you would articulate. One is affordability. Costs are up and challenging on housing, food, healthcare, et cetera. Affordability has been a big issue in recent elections. It will be in 2026. There's continuous upward pressure on electricity prices for multiple reasons. So as we think about climate policy, affordability is really a major factor here. Load growth is a big topic in all states. We're seeing load growth projections that are through the roof because of data centers and other factors. The federal gridlock and attacks on states' rights, on states' ability to move forward on energy and climate programs, kind of cuts to state authority, to funding. These are factors, as well as the increased polarization of our society on multiple issues, climate being just one of them. As we think about climate solutions that involve government action, these solutions and actions are needed during a period of efforts to really weaken government and diminishment of faith in institutions. So kind of headwinds that are at play here. Next. So with those factors kind of in mind, here are some trends that I think we're seeing on state climate policy in multiple states and regions. First, states are showing leadership and are taking action on energy, on climate today. We're seeing deployment of innovative technologies, in multiple states, including red states, where there's support for zero and no emission technologies such as nuclear, geothermal, and carbon capture. We're seeing increased interest in clean firm technologies, meaning like an increased appreciation for the role that clean firm technologies play in a decarbonized grid. We've also seen a lot of activity this past year, and we expect more next year on nuclear energy. And presenters here you're gonna hear more about that across the regions and states. States are already talking about affordability and talking about climate and energy solutions in the context of affordability. We are seeing trends in terms of state budget challenges where many states have budget shortfalls due to federal funding cuts and other reasons. And so this is a challenge for many states as they move forward. And then cuts to federal grants and tax cuts are also kind of a factor that are at play and a trend that states are having to deal with these days. Next slide. So with that, let me turn it over to John to talk us through the Northeast.
Thanks, Jeremy, and hi, everyone. Next slide, please. So my name's John Carlson, and I oversee all of our work in the Northeast. Within that region, New York and Pennsylvania are the states where we spend most of our time, but we do lightly engage elsewhere. And there's been a lot of interesting development this year, some good and some bad. New York They have incredibly ambitious climate goals, which ran into a lot of challenges from the federal government and cost issues in supply chains. Stop work order and pulled permits hit a bunch of offshore wind developments that were already straining under those supply chain and cost issues. And delicate negotiations and legal actions managed to restart some of those projects already under construction, but it's generally understood that no further offshore wind projects are going to move forward until the federal landscape shifts. So due to this and some other deployment challenges, it became clear the state was going to miss its target of hitting 70% renewable energy grid by 2030. However, new modeling that NYSERDA and the state released just this week as part of its updated energy plan shows that they are still on track to have a 100% clean energy grid by 2040, which is the second part of their targets from their landmark climate law. Um, that trajectory is really enabled by a new focus on nuclear resources, which Clean Air Task Force has been intimately involved with the state. They're renewing support for their existing renewable nuclear fleet. They're pursuing a 1 gigawatt project of new nuclear and developing a more expansive plan to further expand nuclear under a statewide master plan that NYSERDA is going to finalize by the end of next year. And that's in addition to a bunch of more specific smaller bore announcements. $40 million last week for nuclear workforce development, a microreactor that's going to be installed at Fort Drum, their engagement in a multi-state coordinating effort with NASIO. And like I said, well, our priority states are Pennsylvania and New York. We do occasionally engage in other states in the region, and we're seeing that nuclear interests across many, many states. Right now, we are working with New Jersey on legislation that they are considering during their lame duck session to advance nuclear and other clean technologies on their grid. Massachusetts is developing a nuclear roadmap, which is going to be finalized in April. And many states are engaged in that multi-state effort that I mentioned, coordinating with NASIO. Um, Pennsylvania in 2025 had a lot of difficulties as well, although those were more internal to decision-making process in the state. It's one of only two states that has a divided legislature, with the state Senate is controlled by Republicans and Democrats have just a bare majority in the House. So partly due to that dynamic, it's been very difficult to make any legislative progress in the state. In fact, they operated without a budget for a large portion of 2025, and that effectively ended consideration of non-budget bills. As part of the resolution that finally happened to those budget issues, Governor Shapiro acceded to Republican demands that he pull the state out of RGGI, which is a regional cap and trade program for the power sector. Pennsylvania had never actually participated in a RGGI auction, as it had been held up in the courts for years, but pulling out of the program officially, it leaves Pennsylvania without a plan to advance a cleaner grid right now. And I think 2026 is really going to be focused on what is the replacement plan to that. Now, without any legislative progress, the state did make progress through some executive actions. In particular, Governor Shapiro had pushed hard for reform at PJM, which is the Regional Transmission Organization. And they also opened up the RISE PA program for applications. Now, this is an incredibly impressive $396 million grant program to incentivize industrial decarbonization projects. The winning applicants should be announced early next year, but even before those awards are made, the program, its existence catalyzed project planning at dozens and dozens of industrial facilities across the state, some of which may move forward even if they don't end up getting the grants. But regardless of whether those move forward, when the grants are awarded early next year, it's likely going to create the most significant cluster of industrial decarbonization projects in the country. So we're really looking forward to celebrating that. Hey, get the next frame, please. So beyond celebrating those RISE PA awards when they're made, the blank slate in PA's legislation means there's an opening to pursue new bills and new concepts on how the state can advance. So right now we're working with lawmakers on bills around geothermal, around nuclear, low carbon fuel standards, siting reform bills. And so I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity in 2026. And then returning briefly to New York, all the nuclear efforts I mentioned are going to progress. NYPA, the power authority, should make a decision on that 1 gigawatt procurement. NYSERDA is going to finalize its nuclear master plan by the end of the year. And New York's also going to pursue clean energy zones to enable concentrated development of renewable and clean resources. It's advancing a coordinated grid planning process and developing a clean energy standard through their PSC. So Clean Air Task Force is engaged in all of those things. We're really excited to see what the region accomplishes in 2026. Now I'm going to pass to my colleague Robert, who covers the Southeast.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, John. I am Robert Kell. I recently joined CATF as the Southeast Regional Policy Manager, and I'm working predominantly in Virginia and North Carolina. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. At a high level, like Jeremy said, the Southeast is really being shaped by load growth right now. In both Virginia and North Carolina, projected demand, especially from data centers. Virginia hosts the largest concentration of data centers in the world and has the largest data center market in the US. This has moved the conversation of reliability and planning to the center. We're seeing growing bipartisan interest in clean, firm resources alongside renewables, while at the same time, we're seeing the utilities Duke and Dominion push for new gas peaker plants. The election cycle in Virginia really sharpened attention on this affordability and long-term system costs. And we've seen heightened debate at the local level around solar and renewable siting. In North Carolina, there's been ongoing political pressure around the state's carbon timeline, with the General Assembly removing the state's interim carbon emissions reduction target, which was a 70% cut from the 2005 levels by 2030. But the legislature kept the net zero target of 2050 goal. This removal influenced Duke's latest carbon plan, giving the utility greater flexibility and resulting in proposals to delay investments on large-scale zero carbon resources compared with earlier plans under that 2030 benchmark. Against that backdrop, there have been several important state level wins this year. In Virginia, one notable step was classifying fusion energy as a carbon free resource in statute. That doesn't deploy projects tomorrow, but it matters because it creates policy clarity and keeps options open as the state plans for high level growth future. Another significant development was the State Corporation Commission approving a utility rate class for very large energy users. This is an important signal that Virginia is starting to grapple directly with how to allocate costs from rapid growth in a way that protects other ratepayers. In North Carolina, we have to take our wins where we can. And despite a lot of political noise, the state's overall carbon reduction trajectory was preserved. And we've seen increasing attention from policymakers and regulators on reliability and resource mix, including more openness toward clean, firm options. Um, let's bring up our opportunities. Looking forward, the opportunities in both states really flow from the above pressures. In Virginia, there's a big opportunity for the new administration to produce a 10-year state energy plan that focuses on growth planning and affordability. There's also room to continue broadening the clean resource portfolio within existing zero carbon frameworks rather than forcing a false choice between technologies. And importantly, improving how we plan for large loads and the demand side solutions will be key to keeping costs down over time. In North Carolina, the focus will be on continuing to defend the state's carbon trajectory while engaging in Governor Stein's bipartisan energy task force around planning discussions for large loads, demand side tools, and how clean, firm resources fit into the mix. In both states, the core challenge and opportunity is aligning reliability, affordability, and climate goals. I'll stop there, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with you all and working with you in the Southeast, and I'll pass it to my colleague, Lindsay.
Thank you, Robert. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Lindsay Cooper Phillips, and I lead our Gulf Coast work. On to the next slide. Our priority states in the Gulf Coast region are Louisiana and Texas. There's some common themes or trends that we're seeing across both of these states. One of those being political and local scrutiny and opposition to clean technologies. whether it's solar, wind, carbon capture, hydrogen. There's been a lot of concerns around safety, property rights, public trust that have led to a number of state policies that are more restrictive or oppositional to some of these clean technologies. But alongside of that, we've also seen some notable progress that I'll talk about today. In Louisiana, the opposition I mentioned has gone a step further, leading to a moratorium on new Class 6 well applications. So, injection wells for carbon capture projects. There's a pause in the state now on existing permits and on new permits entering into that queue. There's also an active debate over renewable siting, which led to some more restrictive policy past this legislative session that we saw in Louisiana. And as I mentioned, we also saw that opposition over renewable siting happening in Texas. But we have seen some sustained momentum on nuclear energy in both states, growing bipartisan support for geothermal energy. And those have been some big wins from this year. And affordability and reliability are big concerns in both states. I'd say particularly Texas, due to rapid load growth, particularly these AI data centers, industrial electrification, and population growth has led to that concern, as Jeremy highlighted at the beginning. Turning over to some of the wins, I'll dig a little bit deeper into the trends that I mentioned. In Louisiana, there's been a lot of state leadership on clean hydrogen. There's been a clean hydrogen task force that's been meeting for about a year and a half. And at the end of this year, about a month ago, they adopted, with unanimous support, their final report of basically policy recommendations on how the state can encourage more clean hydrogen deployment. Those were shared with the governor and with the legislature, and there's been a lot of positive momentum on clean hydrogen. The state also saw its first Class 6 permit issued, again, injection well permits for carbon capture. And the state received primacy in 2023. So this is a really big milestone to see one of the permits issued. We also saw in this legislative session major reorganization around energy regulation. There was a renaming of the energy department, restructured leadership, and trying to modernize regulatory oversight for natural resources. The last piece there is the state has expressed some leadership around expedited permitting for advanced nuclear, basically trying to line up their permitting regimes for nuclear projects, specifically small modular reactors, with the federal permitting to increase or streamline those timelines. Over in Texas, again, a number of wins that we saw, particularly on nuclear and geothermal. In the nuclear space, there was a large bill that was passed creating a nuclear office, a dedicated office just for nuclear energy, and the largest fund that we've seen across the US for nuclear deployment, and that was $350 million. So really excited to see that work move forward. The state also passed a number of supportive geothermal bills, reducing regulatory relief, creating a geothermal policy council, aligning geothermal as a dispatchable resource for the Texas Energy Fund. And then the last big win we've seen in the clean energy space is around EPA awarding primacy over Class 6 wells to Texas. And this actually became in effect on Monday. So this is very new. Turning now to the opportunities that we see in 2026. In Louisiana, as I mentioned, hydrogen has been a big opportunity for 2025, and we're excited to deepen momentum and possibly some policy outcomes for clean hydrogen in the new year. There's also opportunity to continue constructive engagement around carbon capture, building credibility around the technology, focusing on safety and public trust, a number of those trends that I mentioned in the beginning. Also leveraging interest in nuclear for meaningful progress on policy and projects. There's a real opportunity there. And also on informing continued dialogue for clean energy siting, particularly with some of those oppositional bills that have been introduced the past few years. Turning over to Texas, we saw a lot of bills enacted in 2025, and 2026 is a great opportunity to really implement those bills in the geothermal space, in nuclear, operationalizing Class 6 primacy, seeing through a lot of those big bills and investments that have been put forward and ensuring that they're successful is a priority for 2026. Also, continuing to identify and advance state policies that can support responsible carbon capture deployment, which has struggled to gain momentum in the legislature over the past few years. 2026 is a great opportunity to assess what we really need for that technology to move forward in the state. And then the last opportunity I'll highlight is assessing barriers and enabling conditions for clean energy projects. As I mentioned, there's a number of headwinds at the state level. We're all aware of the headwinds at the federal level. So continuing to work with these project developers, whether it's carbon capture, hydrogen, renewables, nuclear, geothermal, there's so much opportunity in these Gulf Coast states. We want to ensure these projects move forward. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague V in the Midwest.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. And thanks everybody for being here. I'm Wiebke Heimach. I am leading our work in the Midwest. Our priority states there are Michigan and Illinois. And so talking a little bit about trends, you're going to keep hearing the same or similar things across the board, one of which here is nuclear is back in the Midwest as well. We specifically saw in Illinois this year that nuclear became politically viable again. And part of that is affordability and reliability concerns due to the rapid load growth and a fast approaching 100% carbon-free energy goal by mid-century that the state had set a while ago and was at this point still underperforming. So this year was really focused on how does Illinois tackle those challenges and how does Illinois figure out how to deliver on their very ambitious climate goals in a way that is affordable for their citizens. There were also very active debates around CCUS and safety measures, including codifying protections for the Mahomet Aquifer. So as there are continued conversations about how CCS fits into the puzzle in Illinois, those protections for the aquifer were put in place, but there will be continued work looking at like Class 6 primacy and other pieces. We have seen, again, as I said, there was this huge focus on how to tackle their goals, how to actually get to 100% carbon-free energy with this rapidly expanding load growth demand and continued reliability and affordability issues. And so they passed the Grid Reliability and Affordability Act, which was obviously named very aptly. And in that, they fully lifted the nuclear moratorium. So initially, 2 years ago, there was a partway lift of the moratorium they had on building new nuclear. And it was specifically for SMRs under 300. Under 300. Now, with this new law in place, we actually have the ability to build advanced nuclear, and there's not been any kind of limitation on reactor size. And that's a huge step forward in Illinois and something we've been working towards for over 2 years, so we're really excited to see that. The Northern Illinois Transit Authority Act also became law, which is investing $1.5 billion annually into public transit, which was a huge win for climate across the state as well. And CATF worked on an industrial decarbonization education campaign that we've seen gain some traction, and we're really excited to continue working on. In Michigan, just like in Pennsylvania, as John mentioned, we had a very small number of bills passed due to our divided government and a very drawn-out budget negotiations. And so, unfortunately, we didn't quite see the forward momentum on some of the issues that we were working on that we wanted to see, given that the House and the Senate didn't really work well together for most of the year. However, CCS was a focal point of discussion in the legislature, and we had opportunities to convene stakeholders to meet with different representatives and really, across the board, deepen the understanding of the priorities that CCS helps Michigan fulfill, as well as the different technologies that are available and how to help deploy that. Additionally, nuclear legislation, like I said, nuclear is back. Nuclear continues to have very broad bipartisan support, which we've been able to see at any kind of meeting that we've attended. There's really been broad support. You could also see that further in the additional investments that were made with Palisades coming back online, which is actually the first nuclear reactor coming back online in the US. And then the wins for us were, again, a lot of conversation around CCUS and the various priorities about how best to deploy the technology. And we did see a CCS package pass the Senate. It is now waiting for the House to be picked up. Similarly, a nuclear package passed the House and is now waiting for the Senate to be picked up. So we've seen movement. There is engagement. It's just sort of the working out the differences between those two chambers. Aviation fuels and low carbon fuel standard, which are also two priorities of ours that we've been working on, have not yet moved, however, have received significant discussion on priorities and frameworks. And so there's been forward momentum on that in the fact that different stakeholders and groups were able to talk and come to some agreements on that. Next piece of the slide. Thank you. So looking forward in Illinois, a big piece is going to be this massive energy bill that I talked about earlier, which includes also for us defending the nuclear provisions in the next year. But a big part of that will be like, how is that implementation going to look, and how are we able to continue to drive this forward through the regulations and implementation pathways. We are excited to participate in Class 6 primacy work groups. Again, as we were seeing the codifying protections around the aquifer, part of that also means wanting to actually explore whether Class 6 might actually be a better way to see how the state can have their protections in place and at the same time deploy the technology. We're interested and excited to also work on a low carbon fuel standard, and we're looking at actually drafting in an umbrella bill language for industrial decarbonization in Illinois. In Michigan, we're hoping to still pass nuclear legislation. We're hoping to still be able to pass CCS legislation. We're looking to work with stakeholders and legislators to amend and pass the low carbon fuel standards that the draft has been out there for 2 years now. We're hoping to tweak that a little bit and actually get that passed as well. And we are looking next year, at least the first couple of months in Michigan, the House is looking to repeal the current clean energy standard. It's not actually going to go anywhere because neither the Senate nor the governor are going to sign off on that. However, there will be hearings and there will be testimony, and it actually gives us an opportunity to talk about clean energy, talk about the importance of clean energy, and talk about nuclear. And so that's what we're looking forward to. With that, thank you so much, and I'm passing it on to my colleague Dan, who is in the West.
Thank you, V. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan. I oversee our Western States region, where we are currently active in Colorado, New Mexico, and Washington. In 2025, we greatly expanded our geographic coverage in this region. Before this year, CATF had only been active in Colorado. This year, we were active in Colorado, both Colorado and New Mexico for the 2025 legislative sessions, and began laying groundwork to engage in Washington State in 2026. All three states have ambitious climate policies already in place, but they each face unique challenges in meeting the goals they've now set for themselves. Since Colorado has been our longest engagement in the region, I'll start there on trends and wins from this year. Governor Polis has been in office since 2019, and in that time, he has advanced a climate agenda that has reduced statewide emissions and is attracting exciting new investment into the state. The governor faces a term limit this coming year, but there are still some things that could be done to keep the momentum going to provide more certainty to investors, such as setting a post-2030 clean electricity target. Though the state is facing budget constraints, the Colorado General Assembly was able to pass several bills, clean energy related bills, during the 2025 session that CATF supported. One bill promoted deployment of advanced nuclear technology to meet the state's clean electricity goals. Another modernized state regulations to accommodate next generation geothermal and carbon capture technologies. And another seeks to accelerate transmission build out by co-locating new transmission lines along existing rights of way, like highways, to avoid potential conflicts with private landowners and wildlife habitat. In New Mexico, Governor Lujan Grisham is also facing a term limit in 2026, but like her neighbor, she has made great progress on implementing significant climate and clean energy policies since she took office in 2019. In some ways, New Mexico is a little bit ahead of Colorado. For example, it has a post 2030 clean electricity target already in place, 100% by 2045. However, in other ways, New Mexico is, I would say, a little bit behind Colorado, particularly in implementing policies that promote clean, firm technologies. New Mexico is unique in that it is the second largest oil producing state in the nation behind Texas. It shares the Permian Basin with Texas, and this production helps fund numerous social programs in the state, including a $210 million community benefit fund for climate projects that was just established this past session. During the 2025 session, the state also established rules for carbon capture, increased geothermal grant funding, passed a grid modernization bill, and prevented several harmful bills from advancing. Washington, unlike Colorado and New Mexico, has a new governor, Bob Ferguson, who is already in his tenure, but has racked up some, who is early in his tenure, but has already racked up some wins since he took office, signing bills from the 2025 session, streamlining permitting processes for fusion, modernizing contracting requirements for new clean energy and infrastructure projects, and updating the state's low carbon fuel standard. Like New Mexico, Washington has a 100% by 2045 clean electricity standard, but it's facing budget constraints like Colorado. One of Washington's biggest obstacles to meeting its clean energy goals is transmission bottlenecks. Despite having some of the most ambitious climate policies in the nation, the state ranks 50th in renewables growth, largely because it lacks the grid infrastructure needed to deliver new electrons to population centers. Despite their unique challenges, each state has opportunities to advance climate and clean energy policies in 2026. In Colorado, the state must reauthorize its Public Utility Commission, which could serve as a vehicle for other clean energy bills that advance clean firm technologies, improve siting and permitting processes between the state and local governments, and accelerate transmission build-out within the state. In New Mexico, though 2026 will be a short session, there are still opportunities to pass policies that attract new clean manufacturing to the state and investment in various clean firm technologies. And in Washington, the state can build on progress it made in 2025 to promote advanced nuclear and fusion technology and address its transmission bottlenecks. One way to do that would be to establish its own state transmission authority. So that's an overview of our current engagement in specific Western states. On a broader scale, we've also been contributing to the Western Governors Association Energy Superabundance Initiative, being led by the current chair, Utah Governor Spencer Cox. We're excited to continue all of this work in the coming year, and I'm happy to pass this to my colleague, Ashley.
Thank you so much, Dan. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Arax, and I lead our work in California. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about some trends impacting the political landscape in 2025, some of which are similar to other states and others which are a bit more specific to California. So on the similarity front, like many other regions, I would say this year was fundamentally shaped by affordability pressures. the Speaker of the Assembly opened this session by dubbing it the Year of Affordability, and it was prioritized as a key issue, particularly after the federal election highlighted concerns around the cost of living. So in California, this meant sort of a major focus on things like rising electricity prices, gasoline prices, and housing costs, and led to both innovative policies and in some cases, created headwinds for more ambitious proposals. At the same time, we're facing intensifying federal scrutiny of and actions against our climate programs and regulations. And so that external pressure pushed lawmakers to reinforce the foundations of our climate programs and demonstrate that the state could continue to lead on policy. Um, the planned closures of two major refineries added another layer of volatility, heightening concerns about supply constraints and also costs at the pump. And this resulted in, a set of measures that aim to balance long-term climate goals with more pragmatic steps to stabilize fuel markets in the near term. At the same time, many Democratic leaders have embraced this idea of abundance, the notion that expanding supply in key areas like housing, clean energy, and infrastructure can drive down costs. And this framing helped reorient conversations around permitting reforms in particular and catalyze some significant updates to the state's core environmental review law, known as CEQA, in sectors like housing. And, additional efforts are expected next year in areas like energy infrastructure. Overall, I'd say despite some complicated dynamics, 2025 was one of the most consequential legislative years for climate and energy policy in recent memory. So first, going over the wins. The state advanced a model to address the cost of new transmission build out, which will be critical to meeting our climate goals, and created a structure that allowed the state to unlock public-private partnerships and deploy lower cost public capital rather than rely on traditional and more costly utility financing. This was a key priority for CATF and exactly the kind of structural reform that we believe is needed to reduce long-term costs while still building the grid that we need to meet our reliability and climate goals. Alongside this, the bill also tackled some of the wildfire costs that are one of the main drivers of increasing rates in the state. Second, the legislature advanced a Western regional grid expansion and coordination, and authorized the state's participation in a Western regional electricity market, which will help pave the way for greater coordination across state lines. It'll enhance grid reliability, lower costs for ratepayers, and also just enable more efficient use of renewable and clean firm generation across the West. The legislature also took a major step to secure California's long-term GHG emissions reductions framework by reauthorizing Cap and Invest program. This is the state's cornerstone market-based mechanism, covers about 85% of statewide emissions, and generates billions each year for climate investments. The program was set to expire in 2030, which was creating major uncertainty for markets and long-term planning and also depressing credit prices, which negatively impacted state auction revenues. So the program was extended through 2045. This helps strengthen confidence in the program and ensures it continues to drive those economy-wide emissions reductions. And finally, California streamed geothermal permitting and lifted the moratorium on interstate CO2 transport, which these will help unlock a source of clean, firm power that California has a lot of in the state, and also support carbon management projects. And these are both essential to meeting our long-term climate goals. So I would say that the 2025 session showed that California can sustain climate progress even in a challenging political and economic environment and advance some innovative policies. Looking ahead to 2026, I would say, in other states, one of the main challenges will be implementation. I think has set really ambitious goals, and now it needs to focus a lot on follow through. So, translating these laws into durable progress, sound regulations, and just tangible results. And I would say some of the key opportunities next year include operationalizing the transmission financing and regional grid coordination, and implementing some design changes to the Cap and Invest program. Other likely policies to come will be additional electricity affordability measures, addressing wildfire, costs, which again, like I've said, continue to drive rates up, and permitting bottlenecks for energy infrastructure. And then I will also say the 2026 governor's race will, shape priorities and momentum. And although the field is in flux, we're seeing early signs that affordability will continue to be a top priority. So we look forward to continuing to add a number of wins in California and engaging and helping the state move toward its climate and energy goals. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to you, Jeremy.
Thanks all. And here's a list of folks who just presented. Please reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you, and I'm sure you have thoughts on the things that have been presented today. It's a lot of information. Reminder, we will get the slides and video out to each of you shortly. Let's jump into Q&A. We got some questions from some of you when you registered. Some others are coming in now, so we'll just take them one at a time. How can states provide stability and certainty in times of federal uncertainty and policy shifts? I think I'll take this one. A couple of thoughts. States can defend their own state authority to pass energy and climate policies generally, and then maintain existing policies that are working. A second way to provide stability is, I think, to continue passing new climate laws. I mean, that shows that climate change continues to be an important issue, that companies can and should plan for emission reductions, and there will be continued progress regardless of federal administrations, that this isn't a topic that's just going to go away. States also can set long-term market signals with policies like a clean electricity standard or a low carbon fuel standard that sets predictable emission reduction pathways over a period of time and with interim goals. I think another final thought I'll put out there is that this is a period to make the most of the opportunities we have now. So to make progress on topics that align with the federal administration's priorities, such as on nuclear and geothermal, fusion, transmission, et cetera. Second question is, in years where reforms that include funding measures are especially difficult to pass, more so than usual, what policies can be spearheaded that advance good climate laws and keep the winds going? Ashley, California comes to mind. Kind of over to you and for your thoughts on this one.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, that's a really important question because I think, like in a number of states, we're living in that reality right now. There's a projected, $18 billion budget shortfall next year. But it doesn't mean that the impactful climate work has to come to a halt, and it can actually help, crystallize things in efforts that are like reducing costs in the existing system and making sure investments are made where they're most needed, which I think is something we should be looking at regardless of the budget picture. So a couple of examples, one that I mentioned earlier is, the transmission financing reform is really important. So, instead of relying on higher cost utility financing, the state has come up with ways to use existing public dollars in more strategic ways, pairing them with private investments and lower cost financing tools to reduce the overall cost of the infrastructure build out that we'll need. So it stretches the same resources further and lowers ratepayer impacts. Another example is sort of ways to think about using existing funding that could catalyze novel technologies. For the first time, California's earmarked funding for a climate-focused technology innovation within the revenue budget from the Cap and Invest program. And this could, fund technologies range from carbon dioxide removal and storage to industrial decarbonization solutions. And then I would say, it's less of sort of novel policies, but just providing market certainty. Reauthorizing Cap and Invest didn't require new spending, but it sent a powerful signal to markets and to be making clean investments over the future, and that our climate framework is durable. And then just, a strong role, I would say, too, for regulatory clarity. So things, like rules for CO2 transport, geothermal permitting, and just providing more predictable timelines and standards. And that can allow projects to move forward even without, incentives or funding. So those are just some examples I would give to help, kind of maintain climate momentum, even in lean budget years, but should be looked at, I think, regardless of the budget picture.
Thanks, Ashley. Let's see, next question. So a number of folks talked about progress on nuclear energy. What are some of the state policies that states are putting in place to support nuclear? New York, Illinois, Michigan come to mind as states this past year where nuclear they've been very active on nuclear. So let's, John, you and V, kind of over to you to maybe answer this question.
Sure, happy to. Why don't I go first? So yeah, a lot of states are very interested in the nuclear space right now. It's clearly having a moment. I do think, part of that is it is a clean technology that seems like there is a space for progress right now, given the federal landscape. But I think there's also a growing realization that clean, firm technologies like geothermal or nuclear are really going to be the cheapest way to get to a decarbonized grid, even if the levelized cost of energy for the specific technology might be higher when you look at a system that works better. And that's what we saw in New York just determine. But some of the policies that I'm seeing pursued in various states are, there are still moratoriums on the books, and states are repealing those. There's a lot of effort towards workforce development. That's an easy kind of immediate effort that states can engage in, and part of the problem with the lack of nuclear development in decades outside of Georgia is lack of qualified construction workers, pipe fitters, electricians, engineers, even lawyers who are familiar with the compliance and regulation in this space. So, really trying to solve that problem. I think states are doing studies to map what nuclear means for their energy system and also to identify siting locations where potential new resource could go in. There's financial incentives. States are looking at different types of grants for constructions or pre-construction efforts, um, uh, energy certificate programs, like within a clean energy standard, or even just focused on nuclear that would incentivize the ongoing production from these things. And then, the multi-state efforts that I think a few of us have referenced. And that's really important, we think, because the only way that new nuclear ends up coming down that cost curve is to build multiple examples of the same reactor design. So, you work out design tweaks that become obvious during implementation. Supply chains develop economies of scale. You get the construction workforce, and that construction workforce gains experience. And if you get multiple states working together, you send that signal for all of these cost curves to start bending, and the different states and the different entities can share the project risks, that would be on the downside, but also the cost savings that'll come from those economies of scales on the upside can be shared across multiple parties. So really interested to see these multi-state efforts and pooled order book conversations progress.
I'm just going to add a couple of things from the Midwest. A lot of what John said is really relevant here. Michigan's nuclear energy package is actually an exact example of what he said, right? So it has a definition of SMRs, the small modular reactors, how they're defined. It has a section on workforce development that has been specifically of interest to the universities here in state, including the University of Michigan, which has a really strong nuclear program. And then the last piece talks about tax incentives. And so I actually want to mention tax incentives just as a really quick piece here, because currently nuclear is actually one of the only technologies that is still receiving federal tax incentives. And so that, even more so than anything, is going to help sort of underwrite the continued growth of renewable energy as well. And that's a conversation that we've been having with lawmakers in my states, is the fact that there are still tax incentives for nuclear. They have been pulled back for wind and solar federally. And so by building out nuclear, we're still then able to actually help to underwrite the additional build out of renewable energy as well. And that's a really important piece of that. So just to add those two quick pieces, and back to you, Jeremy, for more questions.
Thank you. Let's try to get a couple more questions in here. So, how durable are these ongoing state level clean firm deployment efforts if federal political control shifts? Curious about nuclear and geothermal in particular, given the Trump administration's bullishness on those technologies. Quick reaction there, a lot of state action isn't dependent on the federal government. So all the topics and actions that John and V just mentioned are state level actions. I feel confident in their stability, as support for nuclear and geothermal isn't just with Republicans. That's not to say that dynamics won't adjust with next administration, but I don't expect a whiplash on these technologies like we've seen, say, with offshore wind. On nuclear, we've seen there have been a lot of positive steps in Democratic-controlled states. Also seeing the NASIO and NGA, the National Association of State Energy Offices, and the National Governors Association are working with multiple states that are from various political contexts to advance nuclear. So bipartisan interest in that topic. And geothermal, as we heard earlier, also tends to have bipartisan support. To the next question, this one, thanks for you, Lindsay. I'm surprised to hear about progress in Gulf states. What's the motivation for lawmakers in those states if they aren't animated by climate change?
That's a great question. There are a lot of clean energy projects in the Gulf Coast, particularly in the industrial and even in the power sector, though the legislatures are not as ambitious as you might have heard from Ashley or from Dan and their states. But we do see state leadership on creating enabling or favorable policy environments for just getting these new technologies on a level playing field and helping them compete in the legislative context. The drive there is really economic leadership, and I'll speak to it from a few different lenses. In the industrial sector, the Gulf is highly sensitive to global markets. The economies of many of the Gulf states are heavily dependent upon exports. So they see this drive globally towards lower carbon, reliable energy and commodities, and see the need to compete to maintain their industrial base, to protect their export nature, and also capitalize on these premium products that they have the opportunity to really get an edge on those markets. In the power space, we've seen a lot of interest from technology developers. Texas has a lot of interest in AI data centers. They have a lot of existing data centers and a lot of interest in AI data centers. And due to their needs for 24/7 power, these sites are really demanding clean, firm power and have demanded a number of nuclear projects and natural gas plus CCS and geothermal. So this has been a great way for companies to say, we want a certain technology and we're willing to pay a premium for that. And the legislature sees that economic leadership opportunity in that. The other lens of economic leadership I would mention is friendly competition with other states. The Gulf Coast is very used to leading in the energy sector, whether it's workforce or academic programs, infrastructure, or just projects themselves and capital investments. They see other states interested in these technologies. John mentioned the RISE PA program. They spoke to nuclear development. There's a lot of interest across the US in these clean technologies. So there is this element of the Gulf wants to compete and remain the best and keep the best in these new areas. So that's been kind of fun to see, especially in nuclear and geothermal and carbon capture, seeing the Gulf compete with some of their other states.
Thanks, Lindsay, and really appreciate all of you that have joined today. Again, we're going to post a recording of the webinar in the next day or so, and we'll email you a link and the slides. If you have questions or just want to keep the conversation going, please feel free to reach out to any of us on the call here, and keep an eye out for this webinar series in 2026. We're going to continue. It's been very successful, and look forward to continuing to work with you. Have a great holidays. Bye, everybody.